I start in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Peace and blessings on our beloved Prophet Muhammad, his family and his companions. Dear brothers, sisters, families, guest speakers, and our campus lot, welcome all of you on behalf of ISB Campus. It's our eCircle Ramadan special. I hope you are all well, that your families and your friends and your nearest and dearest are well. We are indeed going through a very difficult test collectively as a nation and internationally, and there is so very much for us to reflect on right now and to give shukr for as well. I'm going to take this moment to pray for those who are unwell, those who are sick, whether at home or in hospital, for those who passed away, and for our key workers who are doing an absolutely amazing job, right from collecting our bins, stacking our supermarkets, to the nurses, carers and doctors on the front line in exceptionally difficult circumstances. So a prayer for them. We have an illustrious panel starting with Dr Hany El Banna, followed by, and following him will be Dr Rizwan Syed. After him will be Henrietta Szovati, and we will finish with Batool. So I'm going to hand over firstly. Our first speaker is Dr Hany El Banna, who really doesn't need an introduction at all. He's been our teacher for decades, and especially those of us who come from Birmingham. My husband was very blessed to have spent many days in Dr Hany El Banna's house learning from him. So those of you who don't know Dr Hany, he's founder of Islamic Relief, chairman of the Muslim Charities Forum and Zakat House, president of the Humanitarian Forum. 2004 was a very busy year. His awards in 2004 were the OBE, the Ibn Khaldun Award for promoting understanding between global cultures and faiths, and the Egyptian Medical Syndicate Award. In 2005, he received the Kashmiri and Pakistani Professional Association Award. 2007, the UK Muslim Power 100 awarded him with their Lifetime Achievement Award. And then he was awarded the Ubuntu Award for Social Responsibility from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr Hany El Banna on the topic Ramadan without the mosque, how to connect to our mission this Ramadan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan without a mosque. I think what we need to look at ourselves, a very simple answer. Can we go back to basics? Basics when we had no cars, no electricity, no telephone, no internet, no computer, no places of worship. Especially places of worship when we came here. 60, 70, 80 years ago, our fathers and grandparents came here as workers. And I remember a story of one of my colleague, my friends, was from Yemen. He came in the 50s to work as a factory worker. And 7 and 8 of them used to be in one room. At that time, there was no places of worship. There was no community center. There was no madrasa. There was no schools. But they managed to change their homes, their houses, into madrasa, into community center, into school, into places of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how, during this time, people managed to try to keep the deen, despite the fact they have less resources and less people in the country. If we can look at many stories happen to us, the stories of the children of Israel when they were living in Egypt, tortured by the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was worse than the Corona itself. So they turned their houses into a mosque or a place of worship at that time, because he was torturing them, who was actually killing the newly born babies, especially if they were actually male, and abusing the female amongst them. If we look at the beginning of Da'wah in Mecca, for 13 years, Muslims with the Prophet ﷺ, the companions, had no mosque. Even they were denied to go to Al-Haram to pray by the Qurayshite. They either prayed at home or used to go and meet in Dar al-Arqam, the house of Arqam ibn Abi al-Arqam. So it is nothing new in the history of Islam and in the history of humanity. If you look at the political detainees and the prisoners, the Guantanamo people, they managed to keep their religion in spite of the fact they were locked in. At that time, the way they believed and they still believing in the religion kept them in safety regarding the religion itself. If we look at the Soviet Union, at the time of Stalin and Lenin and afterwards, and how much they treated the Muslims. They closed the mosque, demolished some of them, or changed them into warehouses and stables. Muslims decided to change their bedroom, their front room, their back room into a mosque, into a madrasa, into places of worship, because they want to hold tight to the robe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when Soviet Union collapsed in the 80s or early 90s, they came out in strength, saving the religion in their hearts, so they were not failing. Even if we go back to Andalusia and see the history in Andalusia at that time, in the 15th century, when the Portuguese and the French tortured the Muslims and killed them, Muslims still kept the mosque in their hearts and their houses to keep the religion, which came, and Spain and Portugal now have Islam there, because it is up to the individual. It is up to the individual. It's up to the individual to change his or her house into a mosque. Like Abu Bakr, when he was praying and reciting the Qur'an and was crying with a beautiful voice, you know, the kafir of Quraysh came to complain to the Prophet ﷺ. You know why? Because their children and their wives were affected by the beautiful recitation of Abu Bakr at the time at his house, at his backyard. So Abu Bakr and the others changed their houses into a mosque. Nobody can stop a Muslim from changing any piece of land into a mosque. Prophet ﷺ said, جُعْلَتْ لِيَ الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطَهُورًا. Allah has made the land, the whole of earth, for me like a mosque, a pure land, a mosque for me. If we don't have a mosque to go to, our houses are mosques. So these lessons from the history will take us to the achievers when they were actually as political detainees in different parts of the world. Some of them completed hifz, some of them got their degrees, university degrees, some of them wrote books, some of them wrote novels, and. So they never stopped, because they had a mission to accomplish, and they have a vision. When they get out of the prison, they will be able to help their community, to serve their community, and to save their community. These are some of the examples that I can take from the past to all of us. If I can take you to the difference between being a slave and being a worshipper, abd and abid. Allah created every human being, to be a abd, to be a slave. Some of them believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and some of them did not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became abid, became worshipper. That's why we want to change our places into places of worship. And this is entirely up to us to move from the word of being abd, created by Allah as a slave, to be promoting myself to become a worshipper, a abd. So big difference between me as a abd and me as a abd. This is another thing which we need to look at. How do we connect to our legacy and community? There's so many means of communication nowadays. I remember in the good old days, we did not have all the facilities, but we managed to make it by walking, by talking, by meeting, by sitting together to think ahead for what we need to do. So now, with all the means of communication, nobody can stop you. Today, I had a conference call with Yemen and with Iraq. Yesterday, I had a conference call with, Canada. Last Thursday, I had a big lecture with about few hundred people from different organizations in Baghdad, and in Iraq, and in Chad, and in Turkey, and in Kuwait. So there's no limit for the means of communication of today. We have to use it, not to be abused by it. We have to use the technology to connect. The most important thing that we can do nowadays to keep us busy at home and to decrease this agony of not being able to go to the mosque is connect, deliver, direct, guide, and save, and try to take some initiatives. This is how to connect. I take you to the story of Prophet Noah alayhi salam. When he was actually giving da'wah to his people for 950 years, and few of them believed in him. You know what he was saying in the Quran? قال ربي إني دعوت قومي ليلا ونهارا. Said, Allah, I have invited my people day and night. فلم يزدهم دعائي إلا فرارا. The more I call upon them, I invite them, I try to be with them, they run away from me. وإني كلما دعوتهم لتغفر لهم, and whenever I go to call upon them, to ask you, Allah, to forgive them, جعلوا أصابعهم في آذانهم, they plug their ears by their fingers. واستغشوا ثيابهم, and they covered their head by their clothes. وأصروا واستكبروا استكبارا, and they were determined to turn their back to me and be arrogant with me. And he was inviting them for what? For Allah to forgive them. ثم إني دعوتهم نهارا. Then I call upon them during the day. I invited them publicly, جهارا, not نهارا, جهارا. ثم إني أعلنت بيت, went to talk to them and invite them in secrecy and privacy. And telling them what? Please ask Allah forgiveness. And if you ask Allah forgiveness, He is the forgiver. He will descend upon you from heaven all the blessing that He has. Give you money, give you wealth, give you the gardens and rivers and land. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the 950 years, why don't you have the respect for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He created you in stages? This is the story of Noah and the way he was communicating with his own people, day and night, publicly, privately, in secrecy. So nobody can stop us, brothers and sisters, listening today from communicating, connecting, using the means of communication, the means of connection, but you have to drive. If we have the right iman and the depth of iman in our heart, and the yaqeen on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the clear intention, our houses will be a part of heaven and will make it mosques. And this is what actually we can talk about it actually later on. So If we talk about fasting alone, or solitary fasting, as I was asking to talk about, it's very painful. Very painful that I don't see my mother, I don't see my brother, I don't see my sister, I don't see my son. I have got 5 sons and daughters in Birmingham. 4 of them are independent and 1 is with me. I cannot see the other 4. Neither them or their husband or their wives. Very painful. But I have to keep myself busy with doing 2 things. First of all, I look at what Allah has privileged me with: health, knowledge, wealth, and safety in my society, and peace in my society. All this I have to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about it and bow down to Him. I say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thank you for giving me all this. And on the other side, I have to look at the underprivileged in different parts of the world to realize that an individual is dying every second from hunger. 36 million people every year. A child dies every 5 seconds. 6 million children every year. I have to look at the condition of our brothers and sisters in China, the Uyghur, and how they've been tortured badly. More than 1 million people there, and we are silent about them. And we need to do something about them. And they have to go from there to Arakan, Burma, to the Rohingya for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And we are failing them because we become so busy of what we do to ourselves, for ourselves. Then I move west to Kashmir, Makbuza, Kashmir, and Srinagar, and see how they've been surrounded by 1 million soldiers, torture, fear, and terror, and deprivation. Then I move from there to Yemen to see how the people are suffering for the last 5 years. A country, this population, about 15 to 20 million people are under the poverty level, and they have the war from their neighbors, the Muslims, whatever you call them, Muslims or whatever it is. Then they go to Syria. It is the ugliest scar on the face of humanity. The ugliest scar on the face of humanity, and all of us, including myself. We failed them. We failed the children, the women, the elderly, the displaced, the refugees, the detainees, the raped girls, and all this for 9 years. Have you ever in the history of man see something called the frozen children? People dying because they are frozen. They are not like chicken or beef or lamb that to keep them in deep freezers. They are human beings. Then we move from there to Gaza, under siege for the last 7, 8 years. And we do little, because we are the do little people for them. Then we go from Gaza to Palestine as a whole, and to the rest of the world, to Eritrea, to Sudan, to Democratic Republic of Congo, which is not a Muslim country, but we have to care for it, to Sub-Saharan Africa. And when we look at the underprivileged in this area, we have to thank Allah for what He has given us. Then we share with them what we have. Then we care for them. Then we work hard for them. Nobody can stop you from doing any voluntary activity from home. From home. Nobody can stop us from sending any guiding messages from home. We should not use an excuse of being locked down or locked in our houses. We cannot do anything. We can do a lot. We can reflect during the time that we are at home, thinking about our life, thinking about our failures, thinking about our achievements, and thinking about how can we do something for humanity. And we saw this gentleman, a 99-year-old veteran, who walked the 100 meters at the age of 99. I don't know how much people donated for the coronavirus. in respect of such an individual. Such an individual inspiring us, driving us, guiding us, and helping us to change our houses into mosque. And the mosque is not only a place of the ritual worship, it's a place where we can change our hearts, our mind, and our soul, and build our character and take it from mosque to the community. We don't go to the mosque in Ramadan only to earn blessings and to count the blessings. No, we go to the mosque to charge our hearts. We receive Ramadan to build our morale and to charge our hearts for the whole year. So worship in Islam is not the ritual one, the fasting, the prayer, the hajj, and the zakat. No, it is how, it's this, as well as how to help and to save. When the Prophet, not Prophet, when Ibn Abbas entered the mosque in Medina and they found somebody in making i'tikaf in the house of the Prophet, in the mosque of the Prophet, he told him that the one who is going out to help and to save and to guide his community is far more better than the one who is making i'tikaf in my mosque, as the Prophet said, for a month or 2 months or 3 months. This is how can we change our mosques, our houses into mosques, and how can we recharge our hearts by connection, by working, by volunteering with others, and by reviewing our life and see how much we achieved and how much we failed and what to go for. We can make grouping on the social media and others that in different countries, this Zooming become like a plethora of them. And most of them, subhanAllah, in the poor countries, in places where technology is not as good as in UK or Europe or America. So we should not take the closures of mosques as a no-go for us. We'll take it as a challenge and we'll overcome it by connecting, by communicating, by doing something like the seminar of today. I don't know how many people are watching, but this is a way forward to keep delivering da'wah regardless of the challenges that we are facing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Jazakallahu khair. Thank you so much. It was a very, very passionate and informative talk there. Dr. Hany, obviously we could listen to you for a lot longer, and I'm so sorry we're tight for time. If I could just pick up a few things that you said, in summary, a few of those points. Everybody can change their house into a mosque. And I learned from you that, you know, about the definition of abd and abid, something that I hadn't known before. And the fact there is no limit to our communication, but I love what you said, and I'll probably leave out a few of the points because I didn't get time to write them down, but to connect, to deliver, to guide, and to save. And we all have that mission, and we can all be focusing on that. Jazakallahu khair for your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Hany. I'm going to be moving on because we have 3 more speakers. So next in line is Dr. Rizwan Syed. He'll be speaking on approaching the Qur'an with a new mind. Many of the campus people are very familiar with Dr. Rizwan because we've been meeting every Wednesday for our circles, which have been absolutely fantastic. Dr. Rizwan's been a long-standing member of YM and ISB. He's been head of training and development and the course organizer for the advanced level summer Islamic studies residential courses. He's been studying and teaching Islam since his late teens, developing interests in comparative religion, Usul al-Hadith, Usul al-Fiqh and Islamic history, with a particular interest in the challenge of how to make core Islamic teachings relevant to our current contemporary context. He's also our lead teacher for our Wednesday e-circles and is a GP with a specialist interest in musculoskeletal medicine with 4 children in Birmingham. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Rizwan on approaching the Qur'an with a new mind.
Inna alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. MashaAllah, so many people obviously eager to engage with this exciting month. And you know, wow, what a different Ramadan it's going to be this time, subhanallah. Dr. Hany, I mean, you know, what a comprehensive speech, mashallah, covering so many different areas. But I think what I took away from that was the importance of mercy, that Ramadan is the month of mercy. It is the month of charity. It's the month of the heart. And I'm going to talk about a different dimension, which is the Qur'an. So let me just start sharing, one moment. Here we are. Share. Okay, so the notes are available. They're going to come out on the WhatsApp groups, I promise you. So maybe if Sarah, you could just send a link on the chat right now for people to ask to add themselves to the WhatsApp group if they find that you know, they're not on there already and they'd like to get the notes. So talking about the Quran, remember that the Ramadan was special for the Quran before it was special for fasting. Actually, the Quran is actually what made Ramadan a holy month in Islamic terms. Okay, because the very first instance of Islam beginning was in Ramadan. Yeah, Ramadan, shahr alladhi unzila fihi al-Qur'an, hudan lin-nas. That Ramadan is the month in which the Qur'an was revealed as a guidance to mankind. Subhanallah. So mankind was in darkness. It's true, and the light came on, right, in the month of Ramadan, and we know that in that was the special night of Laylatul Qadr. So there is the whole story of how the Quran started and how it ended up as the book. I don't have one with me actually, but you know, as it ended up in the book that we have today. It's quite a long story. I've put it in the notes, and I wanted to. I really hope that everyone, if you can, you know, if I don't get time to say much about it right now, please do read the notes. Very brief. And it's a real just sort of summary sketch of how the Quran came to be in the form of a book. Because at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was revealed in short bursts, as you know. And every time something was revealed, the Prophet ﷺ got his companions to dictate it. He actually had 65 scribes. At different times, different people, when they're around, would get little parchments, little bits of leather or wood or bone, etc., write it down. And those little, you know, small aid memoirs were very useful to pass around the companions. But anyway, after the Prophet died, then those fragments were all collected together with secure witnesses to put together into a book. And then at the time of Uthman, radiallahu anhu, when there were variants of the Quran, and the Prophet had allowed different tribes to read the Quran almost as translations, actually, where there were words that they didn't understand because the Qurayshi Arabic was alien to them. You know, he allowed them to read it in their own tongue almost. So the variants were causing a lot of confusion. So Uthman then collected a committee together, including Qurayshis, because they were the people who knew the accent, the dialect of the Quran, of the Prophet ﷺ, of Mecca, so that this would be exactly as it was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, and the fragments were all double-checked. This copy was produced. Remember that in the meantime, of course, the Prophet had emphasized memorization. Many companions had memorized the Quran, and actually a number of companions had compiled their own collections of the Quran, but they were done by individuals, whereas this was done by a committee, double-checked, triple-checked, And this was done in Medina, where obviously there's a congregation, a collection, a concentration of companions, 10,000 companions in Medina. And they all basically read this, double checked it, were happy with it. So this gives us the assurance that actually what we have today is most definitely the very book, word for word, as it was revealed to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also in the exact style, with the exact choice of words, absolutely as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given it by Angel Jibril, who was given it by Allah. So here we are, this book. It is a book like no other book, right? It's so strange. It's so different. Sometimes non-Muslims will look at it, and people who, like for instance, Thomas Carlyle said great things about Prophet Muhammad. But when he talked about the Quran, he said this is the most confusing book that he just couldn't get his head around, because it doesn't have the normal narrative style of a beginning, middle, and end, of course, But the style of the Quran is so unique and so different that actually when you read the Quran, if you read Hadith, you can see that it's a completely different linguistic style. The Quran has a rhythm to it. It has a cadence. It has it rhymes in places. It's almost like poetry. Sometimes the way it's read, it's like music. You have this. You've seen these videos, haven't you, of people who are unfamiliar with the Quran hearing it, and they're like, "Whoa, this is awesome music. What is this stuff?" Sort of thing. Subhanallah, it's so special. But what's really special is not just the sound of the Quran, but the fact that every single part of it is deep, rich with meaning. Subhanallah. And this is the meaning that actually created transformation. So the light that came from the Quran, it was a guide. It was a furqan. It was a criterion between right and wrong that changed a society. This community of the Prophet ﷺ and this nation of the peninsula of Arabia received the Quran, and as they received it, it molded them, transformed them slowly, bit by bit, into a people who are guided by the moral values of the Quran, who were transformed in their outlook and transformed in their relationships with one another. Right? This is a book that created a new civilization, which then came to dominate the whole world. Subhanallah, all based upon this book. The other thing that's really special about the Quran, and you will feel this, I'm sure, the way I do as well, is that actually, as we talk about with Salah, that during Salah you're talking to God, right? You know the meaning of the Salah, inshallah, and it's literally us talking to Allah. Okay, but when you read the Quran, it's like the reverse. This is when God is talking to us, and it's actually when you actually literally feel like, in the here and now and today, God is still talking to us. So it's like a personal conversation that you have. And I'm sure you found it that sometimes you'll be thinking something, you open the Quran, and within a couple of pages, it's like the answers come to you. Other times you'll come across something and it will just give you a thought that stays with you for days afterwards. Subhanallah. That's the power of this book. It's just, amazing. What I want to do is, we're talking about the fact of having a kind of fresh approach to the Quran. Because of, obviously, the fact that our Ramadan is going to be vastly transformed now, okay? Taraweehs are not going to be possible. There might be some creative ways of doing it. But actually, the nature of the believer is that we know that whenever there are challenges, actually with them, there's also opportunities as well. Yeah, inna ma'al usri yusra, that with hardship comes ease, and that our approach is one of gratitude. So whatever comes, we say Alhamdulillah fi kulli hal, that whatever happens, we praise Allah and we thank Him, and we look for the good, and we look for the opportunity for something positive that can come from our situation. So if you're going to reframe essentially our situation and our Ramadan as it confronts us now in this vastly different way, where the mosques are locked, never mind empty, think about how we have an opportunity here to connect to the Quran in a different way. Okay, and I would propose that there are 3 things that you could do this Ramadan with the Quran, which is maybe different. Perhaps not, but maybe it's different to how you've related to the Quran before. Okay, because remember, the month of Ramadan is focused, even though there's fasting, it is the month of the Quran. So do something different. The 3 things I'm going to suggest is, firstly, to look at your memorization of the Quran, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Secondly, to look at the way you read the Quran, and thirdly, your study of the Quran. Okay, so just give you a few verses to appreciate just, you know, what an amazing book we're talking about. So this verse you will have come across many times before. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. That if we had revealed this book on a mountain, then you would see it humble itself and cleft asunder out of fear of God. Now, this is a parable, right? Don't try putting the Quran on a mountain and expect it to start trembling or anything, okay? But it just shows the tremendousness of this book and how actually we don't often treat it that way, you know? The second thing to think about is that Surah Rahman, a beautiful surah, as you know, it's just the rhythm, the beauty of it. And frequently through that surah, Allah says, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Then which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? So the Surah Rahman begins with all the favors. And it's so beautiful. It talks about just what an amazing world we have. It talks about the balance that's in nature, right? But the first gift that it talks about, Ar-Rahman. And what does Rahman mean? Rahman means the loving kind. It means the one who loves and is generous, the giver, the bounteous, the most beneficent, the most gracious, okay, through love, giving and giving. That is Ar-Rahman. So what's the first thing that he gives that he wants us to be aware of? That he taught us the Quran, Allama al-Quran. Okay, so it's a gift. Think of your Quran as your gift, okay, not just the covers, but what's inside it, right? And then the third thing is this verse in Surah Baqarah where, it's a sad story. It's the story of how Adam and Eve were, you might say, cast out of the garden, and they're left in this lonely wilderness, this, strange and barren, strange land called Earth. And then Allah gives them a bit of hope, because He says, فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُمْ مِنِّي هُدًى, that when guidance comes from me, فَمَنْ تَبَعَ هُدَايَ, then whoever follows my guidance, فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, that on them will be no fear, which is basically anxiety, worry about the future. وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, and they will not have sadness, which is basically depression, looking back at your life with sadness, that sort of darkness that you get with depression, right? You'll actually be comforted. So the Quran will be your friend, right? This guidance will be your friend. So the question is, how do we befriend the Quran? And so these are the 3 things. The first point I just wanted to make there is that that you connect intimately with your Quran. Now, what does your Quran mean? What do I mean by that? I mean that actually, do you know, when I say your Quran is something that you're carrying within you, okay? How much of the Quran are you carrying within you? It's the bit of the Quran that you've memorized. So what I'm going to say to you is that whatever you've memorized, get close to it. By get close to it, I mean memorize it sharply, go over it, all right, sharpen your memorization, but also try to not only know the translation, but try to understand the Arabic a little bit as well. At the end, I've got a few hints on how to get going with Arabic, but actually it's not that difficult. Most of you will have done a modern language. You'll know the basic ideas of verbs and adjectives. Just look at how you find them in Arabic. Find the connecting words, prepositions, pronouns. And once you start to do that, it actually starts to become a lot more accessible. And then you've got apps these days as well, which is amazing. So I've got an app which is over here on page 2. Okay, and you can literally press on each word and it tells you the meaning of that word, but also other places in the Quran that it's available. There's also a website called Corpus Quran, which does the same thing. There may be something, this is Android, so there may be something that's available on Apple as well, similar to that. Just makes it so easy to actually really get to grips with what you memorize, because that's your Quran. That's what you're carrying with you. Anytime you're bored, you can just start reciting it and connecting with it. Okay. The second point, which I'll just make very briefly, is tartil. And you know, there's this ayah in the Quran which says, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. And when Allah does that, it really emphasizes it. It means do tartil on the Quran with even more tartil. Right? Do lots and lots of tartil on the Quran. So the question is, what is tartil? Khurram Murad talks about this. Way to the Quran, you've got to read that book, okay? So he says that no single word in English can express the full meaning of tartil. In Arabic, it means reading without haste, distinctly, calmly, and in measured tone. This is like reading with the same beauty and the accent and the style of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he used to read, would read slowly, and he would pause after every verse as well. Why do you think he was pausing after every verse? Is it because he was trying to think about, well, what's the next verse? No, of course not. Think about it. Sometimes you read the Quran so fast, you think, how can you reflect on it? Yeah. So he'd read it slowly, but also stop to think, oh, wow, you know. So this is, you know, learn a little bit of tajweed, maybe play some qaris, etc. Try to get your reading in the way that you'd love to read it. You feel the beauty of it as you read it, okay? And we know that the Prophet ﷺ and pious people after him as well would sometimes take a bit of the Quran and just kind of recite it again and again and again, okay? And this beautiful hadith where he says that person who's skilled in reading the Quran is with the noble, virtuous angels who bring down the revelation, Jibreel Islam, because you're reading it like Jibreel. The same way that Jibreel read it to the Prophet, that is the way that you're reading the Quran as well. Wow, imagine that. But remember, don't lose heart if you're struggling. We all struggle, okay? Because the Prophet adds a little bit of hope. Even if you're struggling, you get twice as much reward for trying, despite your inability to get it right. Okay, so that's the positive. Final point, very quickly, is tadakkur and tadabbur. So actually, you know, when you read the Quran, immediately as you read it, if you're reading the translation, you start to get lessons, and that's tadakkur. You get something and it just makes you think, and you take a bit of reflection from it, a bit of a lesson, you know, and you think, oh yeah, subhanAllah, I really sort myself out mostly, and like, wow, you know, I'm getting so distracted with the dunya, etc. So these are immediate lessons that you get, and that's tadakkur. Okay, then there's a level beyond that, which is tadabbur. And this is where, you know, when you start to like look at individual words and you look at how they connect, you look at the preposition and why is that preposition used, you look at the tafsirs, you look at how one verse relates to the other, then you start to unlock layers and layers of meaning. And then it gives you a reflection that may be a little bit deeper still, you know, and this can be something very personal. So in each era, you may actually read the Quran in a different way. Okay, and for each individual, the Quran can mean something different. And this comes from like really getting your teeth into the meaning of the Quran. So that's the final point I want to make for everybody is, you know, take some time out, slow down, because, you know, quite honestly, it's nice to talk in lockdown as if like everyone's got lots and lots of time, but we know that not everybody has lots of time. You know, some people are very busy cooking, they're still working, there's kids, etc., etc. And as a consequence of that, you know, what actually happens is that there isn't that much time left, and you end up feeling guilty because you've actually set yourself unrealistic targets with the Quran, right? I would say slow down, bring it back down to something that's special, right? Quality over quantity. That's what I would say for this Ramadan. Try that out. Try that out. These are some examples. They're in the notes of, you know, people have read these verses and they've come out with some interesting reflections on them. There's actually a website which is in the notes as well, which has got a series of people who've just given reflections on how the verses, what different verses mean to them. You know, and there's certain ones where people have talked about coronavirus as well, for instance, and you know, you read the verse and you just think, wow, yeah, subhanallah, it's really made you think that we had a secure world, and there's an ayah which just tells you how people thought they were all secure and safe and everything was fine, and suddenly everything changes and the power of Allah manifests itself. So, Khair, that's it. I'm done. Sorry if I've overrun slightly, but just to remind you, the notes are here. There's a few little bits about connecting with, you know, the Arabic and how to make it a little bit easier with some of the simple words. Once you've learned those, just learn those, then you can just click on the button and it will tell you what the verb is, what the noun is, and you can start to actually understand and relate to the Quran very, very intimately. And that's the point. Connect to the Quran intimately and it becomes your friend. It becomes your friend, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much. Jazakallahu khair. Okay, well, Ramadan is the month of the Quran, so there were lots of tips there. Really nice the way you said, you know, look for something positive out of this very difficult situation. And we can all really think about, you know, the memorization, the way that we read, you know, looking at quality, not quantity, slowing down, and the study of the Qur'an. So our next speaker is Henrietta Szovati. Henrietta is the author of Heart Smart, One Woman's Journey from Her Head to Her Heart. She's a life strategist and leadership coach. She runs her own consultancy on neuro leadership and is also the co-founder of Barefoot Institute, which is a Muslim relationship counseling organization. She's been training, educating, and coaching for over 12 years in the UK, Spain, Egypt, and the USA, and she coaches people to unlock their potential. She lives in London with her husband and 2 teenage children, and she'll be speaking today on spiritual renewal in times of constraint, the practical steps to renew our spirituality. So Henrietta, I hand it over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Can you hear me all? Yes, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for all of you to join us for this circle. And I have been really busy for the last 4 to 5 weeks, ever since the lockdown started. I have been working with families, particularly supporting them through this very difficult time emotionally. And what I wanted to speak about today is to bring some of that experience that has been quite revealing to me personally and to the organization that we work together with. We provide support for teachers and staff, parents who have been finding themselves in situations where they need to homeschool, which they have never done before. But before I do that, I would like to remind us all that it's, whether we have COVID-19 crisis, if we could call it as that, because I have a really funny relationship with this word crisis. I have a very different take on this, and I believe that one of the things that we Muslims, that makes us different as Muslims, that what we need to accept and understand is that for us there is a real solid foundation of believing that whatever happens to us, it happens for the best. We may not see it in the moment when it's happening. We may not know why something is happening, but I find so much comfort and so much solace in the idea that however difficult our situation is, and I know many of us were panicking when the COVID pandemic started and the lockdown started, but actually now that Ramadan is approaching, we can really take stock and think about very deeply of this different Ramadan. What does it mean for us, and how can we reap the benefits of this? Ramadan has always been a reset for our spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional, intellectual and emotional, and all encompassing aspects of our life. We would like to progress linearly. We would like to know more this Ramadan than what we did last year. We would like to study more. We would like to expand our horizon on the subjects that we are engaged with. But we also would like to deepen our knowledge. We would like to go deeper. So the idea of spiritual growth during Ramadan is so important, because I think we have to move with the time, continuously moving. And I try to take this, and I find so much solace when I talk to families about the current situation they find themselves in, is that moving forward and going forward in a linear way isn't the only way to feel that we are progressing. And I think it's one of the things that I often find myself struggling, that I have this whole load of things that I want to study. I have a long list of ideas that I want to achieve by the end of Ramadan. And if I don't, I feel like a failure. And I think it's important that we stop and think about if I can't go forward, how can I go deeper? If I can't go outside, how can I go inside? If I can't be doing the things that I would normally do, which would mean inviting friends and families for iftar, attending mosque events, or doing things outside of my home, what are the things that we can do that would help us to deepen our connection this month? So I believe that this whole situation currently, it's actually a huge masterclass on many things. And one of the things that I find that people are learning and realizing and finding ways to be with is how to renew our mind and how to become more mindful of what we do. And I think there's no better time than this, when we can actually look at how our emotional state and our spiritual state is growing and developing together. There are many people who are working in the front lines, people who are extremely stretched. They're literally putting their lives at risk to save lives, and I have spoken to many of them who have very little energy left to renew themselves, which what makes me think that actually what we have at the moment, although we feel like a lot of things have been taken away from us, what we do have and what we have available is our spirit, it's our soul, it's something that we personally are responsible for. And I think because until now it was the idea of us helping others, us going out and make ourselves available for support, has been the prime concern, and we have been focusing that on a lot. I think this whole crisis is reminding us is how can we engage with ourselves and fill our hearts and soul, so we can still be a support for each other. But some of us are actually struggling with very different things that we didn't know before. We didn't know 6 weeks ago, we didn't know a couple of weeks ago. And as I go through the trainings that I do with people in the last couple of weeks, every single week is different. Because when the lockdown came down, the spirituality of it, people loved being at home and being, free from going to work and making long journeys. That there was a release of some of those things that were taken away from us. And then we started going inwards. But now that the time is going on, we are spending extended amount of time with families, and we are very confined in the way we function spiritually and emotionally. So the challenge is even bigger. Therefore, being more mindful is even more important. Ramadan has always been designed for us to move away from habitual ways of being and thinking and acting. And in an essence, it's to redirect our obsessive, I call obsessive way of thinking, because we are all wrapped up in lots of things. And I think the spiritual principles, the universal spiritual principles that form part of our beliefs, are there to open and soften our hearts, connecting us more deeply with ourselves, intimately with others, with the world around us, and with our authentic self, which is much needed ground we need actually in these very testing times. And I just wanted to pick up on one of those spiritual principles, but I've got 10 here in front of me. And I will just read to you the 10, and I wanted to focus on the first one. Acceptance, open-mindedness, gratitude, humility, patience, having faith, integrity, self-acceptance, forgiveness, and service. So these wonderful spiritual principles go across the board in everything we do, how we learn, how we practice our faith. But I wanted to speak about the first one, acceptance, which I believe is one of, well, of course, all of them are connected, but and we can do a separate talk about all of them. But acceptance is one of the things that we as human beings would probably resist the most, because it's a really hard thing to follow. Human beings are by nature, we want to do the things that we think we should be doing, the things that we believe is the right thing for us. Whereas currently the time is such that there is nothing that, well, almost nothing that is under in our control. So we will struggle, our ego will always struggle to say, no, I don't want this, I don't need that, I want something else. And it's really hard at the current time, because now everything is, you know, the things that have been so important, they have been taken away, or the things that have been, you know, not something that we have worked with, it's under our nose. We are confined in spaces, and emotions run high, and things can get really intense. I believe that this pandemic is teaching us this very core principle, is to surrender and accepting everything that we have, accepting the situation we are currently in. But accepting it doesn't mean that we are accepting, sit down and do nothing. What it does, actually, acceptance, what it helps us to do with our emotions is that acceptance allows us to relinquish the control. And without that control, we are much more clear headed, we are a lot more focused, and we can come back to our core center of who we are as human beings. And from there, we have the hope to develop and to grow this Ramadan. So I would like to give you this as a point of reflection of what you know of who you are and what your core strength is. Accepting that and how can you grow from that would be a great starting point. I have been doing a lot of work in spiritual intelligence, and one of the things that they teach very passionately is that everything that ever happens to us as human beings is an advantage if we know how to use it. And I am a huge believer in this because most of the time we don't understand, we don't see what good is in for us for a situation that we are faced with. And that is where our acceptance is very closely linked with other virtues. For example, being open-minded and being able to see a situation differently. And I'm particularly thinking about the people who really struggle, you know, still going to work, not having any time to recover from the work that they need to do. They literally put themselves at risk. But it's also connected to the idea of patience, that we may not know what good is going to come out for the situation for us, because we can only connect the dots when we look backwards. We cannot decide now what was the good for me, but actually when upon reflection, any situation that you have faced in your life and in our life, when we look back, you can see how every single situation carried the element of something that you could grow from, something that was your according to your advantage, something that was giving you something essential that you couldn't have done or you wouldn't have done had that situation not occurred. And I think I find this extremely comforting when I see people, you know, for example, families who find themselves homeschooling the children, or people who have been in very difficult homes and they live in violent situations, that really in that moment the core center is the only thing that they can hold on to, and the reliance on Allah, and that connection is so intensified in a situation where we are in. Because if you think about previous years compared to this year, we have had very easy Ramadans, even though then we were complaining about how long the hours are and, you know, how difficult other things are. We didn't know that there are situations which could be, and as currently is, are a lot harder than what we could have anticipated. Finding ways to accept the things that are beyond our control is actually a really important muscle to develop, because I think the underlying principle of that would be, and it is, that once we understand that I have nothing, I cannot control certain things that happen to me, it actually provides a freedom, and it allows us to shift our attention from what I would like to have, what my selfish, egoistic self would require, to shifting to a more of surrendering and accepting and almost finding a comfort in Allah's provision, because Allah doesn't give us anything more than what we could bear. So I think for me, the idea of acceptance out of all the 10 spiritual principles is one of the hardest, but it's also one of the most fundamental thing. And I would highly recommend that you spend this Ramadan flexing and exercising and working on this muscle of acceptance, because it doesn't mean that we can't do things that are wrong and unjust. What it means is that we can do it with more conviction, with more connection with Allah, with more groundedness of who we are, and it could come from our more spiritual, more authentic self. Now, I'm very conscious of time, and I had something else that I wanted to share with you, but I will type up the notes and I will send it, because I would like to give the time for the next speaker to have her time as well. But I will send you notes, or I will send Sarah notes about the spiritual principles that we can all gain from Surah Fatiha. And I find this extremely helpful. It's 6 principles. And we'll send you the typed up notes, and you will receive it. Jazakallah khair for listening to me. Thank you so much.
Jazakallahu khair, Henrietta. That was really moving. The spiritual side of this whole pandemic. It's easy sometimes to have lists, isn't it, of things to achieve, but actually, you know, as GPs, you know, we worry about people at risk and people involved. Dr. Hany was talking about earlier was reaching out to one another. There's nothing stopping us communicating virtually and reaching out to one another. And that focus on accepting and surrendering to sort of almost ground ourselves, kind of send the panic away and the anxiety into the ground, and to strengthen ourselves. And I think you described it as a muscle of acceptance. So we need to be flexing that muscle of acceptance in our workouts. Thank you so much. Jazakallahu khair. Okay, so thank you for being patient with us. Last but not least, we have our final speaker, Batool Al Toma. Batool is founder and director of the Convert Muslim Foundation. She was director of the New Muslims Project at the Islamic Foundation in Markfield, Leicester. She's editor of The Meeting Point, which is a magazine that she's devised a number of education and training programs which have been delivered around the UK. She has 4 children and 4 grandchildren, mashallah. So Batool will be speaking on family and isolation, how to build more resilience in families. So for our final speaker, I'm going to hand over to Batool.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me? Yes? Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam wa barak ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, wa khala rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri, wa la luqtatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Thank you so much. I really feel that you're probably all ready for bed now. This is probably the worst thing about being the last speaker. Yeah, everybody's almost asleep, and the other 3 speakers have almost said everything that I was thinking of saying. And there's my alarm gone off for the end of my speech that I just put on. Anyway, I was just going to thank Dr. Hany, actually, mashallah. I wanted to thank him for something that's up on his mantelpiece behind him. I don't know if you've been watching him and you saw on the mantelpiece behind him, he has got a beautiful ayah from the Qur'an, Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. And of course, that was, it means that Allah is sufficient for us and He is the best disposer of our affairs. And this was when the hypocrites said to the Prophet ﷺ, a great army is gathering against you, therefore fear them. But it only increased their faith, and they said, Allah is sufficient for us and He is the best disposer of our affairs. And what better ayah from the Quran could we repeat to ourselves in this very challenging time of coronavirus? Of course, Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is the best disposer of our affairs. So we're going to start about reliance, and I just want to get through this really quickly, as fast as I can. Reliance, or grit, biting your tongue and grit. Or I don't know if any of you of the older generation out there remember a film years ago called True Grit. John Wayne used to be in it. It was a Western, and it was a really meaty, punchy film. But it's that kind of intensity of direction and intensity of firmness in yourself and to get through something. So it's defined as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity or trauma, tragedy, threats, and significant other sources of stress. So you know, there's a whole host of problems that we as families might be going through at any time in our lives, where resilience is often the thing that gets us through it. Family issues, relationships, health, work, financial problems, all of which can cause us a variety of different things and a variety of different levels of stress, pressure, sleep deprivation, depression, anxiety, all of these things. In all of these sort of situations, we find ourselves facing throughout our lives. Most of them will not have had entirely be ready for, or be trained for, or have any prior notice of them, and the fact that they're coming or they're heading in our direction. I'm thinking myself something maybe like about, you know, somebody going into hospital to have a baby, a first baby. You don't know what to expect. You're never really ready for that sort of situation. Yes, you're going to have a new child and you have some knowledge about how to look after it, about how a baby works, about what sort of things you have to do. And you know that you're going to have some help and support, and you'll probably read lots of information about that sort of situation, and baby books and all that and the rest, and family circumstances and family experiences you'll have learned from. But you won't have any knowledge of that act itself, of giving birth to that child. And I can tell you, when I went in to have my first child, I had a smile on my face from ear to ear. Well, I can tell you that it was well wiped off by the time I came out of the hospital. And that was something that it was an experience that I hadn't had any knowledge of beforehand. And of course, I went through it, I got through it. And then when I went to have my next child, I knew what to expect. So I knew that I was going to have to grit my teeth, be resilient, and, you know, make the best of a bad situation and get through it. And alhamdulillah, that's what happens when we go through challenges where our resilience is raised and we're empowered by it. Then, of course, in the next challenge, we deal with it a whole lot better. But we have choices as well in how we react to things. How do we see it? And it's almost about attitude as well. Do we see what is coming towards us as a threat, or do we see it as a challenge? Have we got hopeful optimism in terms of how we're going to deal with it? Or are we, you know, sort of unsatisfied and unhappy about the situation and sort of dragging ourselves down on account of it? And so it's a choice that we make in ourselves, how we're going to face that challenge. So though we may not be able to control, we will be able to grow from the experience. And of course, in this experience that we're going through now, we're not able to control it. It's very difficult. And I had my daughter outside the door today, and she's managing a care home for disabled adults. And she was in tears because she'd had a phone call from her head office to tell her that 3 workers in one of the same homes down in the south of England had died today. Now she's scared, obviously, and she's trying desperately to ensure that it doesn't come into her care home, but she's never sure. She's doing everything she can, and like all of us, and we're being resilient about what we do and about hand washing and taking care and everything. But, you know, it can come in spite of that. But it will improve our lives, and we will be empowered on account of it, inshallah. Now, is it something that we're born with, or is it something that we learn? I was talking to my son about this in the car yesterday, and he was saying, well, I think we're born with it, actually, because he said, you know, when you see how a baby sometimes will just cry and cry and cry and cry louder until it gets the attention. Now, obviously, you can say that's, you know, Allah put that in the child. It's something that it's an innate thing that the child is born with, to draw attention to their needs and stuff. But it's amazing how a child begins to learn that the more they cry or the more they throw a tantrum or the more they do something, the more resilient they become, you know, in terms of what they can get on account of it. So I think maybe it's to do with character development as well. And it probably has both things there, you know, that we become more resilient as we grow and as we meet challenges. Okay, spiritual encounters. Of course, somebody mentioned it before, inna ma lasra yusra. After every difficulty comes ease. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always bring ease. And that's the first thing I think we have to think to ourselves. Yes, we're going through a really difficult time, but you know, there's wisdom in it. And inshallah, after after this, Allah will bring ease. I'm running further in time. And one other verse from the Quran, and I saw it in Dr. Rizwan's outline there. It's really the most beautiful verse in the Quran. If anybody asked me, what's my favorite verse? Those who believe and whose hearts find rest in the remembrance of Allah, verily in the remembrance of Allah will hearts find rest. And in that last part, verily in the remembrance of Allah will hearts find rest, I had it engraved on my husband's headstone in the graveyard, because it's something that's deep in my heart. I love that verse so much. And only in the remembrance of Allah could I feel that I was going to get through this incredible challenge of losing him, and how I was going to continue life without his presence in my home, in my life, in my children's life, and so on. And so this is what we have to remember. If we claim to be believers and we'll be tested, and as Henrietta said, we'll never be tested with something more than we can bear. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to, you know, sometimes people feel that they have the strength and the resilience, and but they haven't. But when the test comes, they haven't got it. And that's where our resilience steps in order that we thank Allah for giving us the opportunity to use our resilience to support them and to help them and to, you know, nurture them through this challenge. And it's a blessing on us that maybe some people are not as resilient as we are. And even when people die, and so many times we're saying it these days, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, that from Allah we come and to him is our return. But how much do we really believe that? How much do we just roll it off our tongues as just something that we say, and, you know, if we don't say it, we're not good Muslims, and, you know, we need to look pious and be pious. No, it's something that has really deep, meaningful, profound you know, significance for us, and we should know the meaning of it and know that yes, somebody is gone, but they're gone back to Allah because he has called his servant forth back to him on this day, and we should pray for them and make dua for them. Yes, just to bring it to an end, you know, resilience is the ability to persevere, to be resilient, to have grit, is linked directly to our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. First, our reliance on Allah, but then also to have the right proportionality in terms of our individual effort, in terms of building our own self-resilience, and also societal and society's support in that as well. So we all come together in that resilience. And that's it really. That was all I think I have time to say. I don't want to hold you any longer, but we should all recite Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil as often as we possibly can, and to pray as much as we can and read Qur'an as much as we can. And let's always remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, Inna nahnu nazalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidun. I have sent it down. I will protect it. Don't worry about all these people who are going to burn it, who are going to throw it, who are going to destroy it. Read it, take it in, you know, hold it within yourself and use it to change yourself from within, inshallah, this Ramadan. Ramadan Mubarak to all of you. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallahu khair, Batool. That beautifully ended on a spiritual high. Thank you so much for reminding us of the importance of developing grit and resilience, and practicing that, and how it got easier in the example that you gave. So with the more that we practice that, we exercise those muscles that we were talking about earlier, and choosing how to respond to situations, importance of hopeful optimism. Many campus attendees today will be familiar with many on the panel today. Many of you have very kindly come to our masterclasses and residentials to speak on different topics, so it's great to see familiar faces again. In summary, it's been a fantastic evening. Thank you everyone for logging on. We started with Dr. Hany El Banna talking about the importance of making our homes a mosque and continuing to connect with learning and delivering. We moved on to Dr. Rizwan Syed speaking about the importance of the Qur'an. Ramadan is the month of the Qur'an, and thinking about our memorization, the way in which we read it and study it, and focusing on tartil and tadabbur. We moved on to Henrietta Szovati speaking, amongst other things, about accepting and surrendering, and the importance of that in this very difficult time to ground ourselves in a very anxious time in this pandemic. And finally, Batool, thank you so much about speaking about resilience and grit, patience, and again, coming back to the Qur'an and the verses, the beautiful verses of the Qur'an that you reminded us of. From me, Sarah Seigel, campus in charge, I think that it is important to remember that as an organization and as Muslims, we have one another, and not just as Muslims, as people and as neighbors, and that we reach out to one another. You know, that's what we are there as communities for. Something that's been a real highlight for campus is that as regions, campus attendees have actually got online together for social. So they've read some Qur'an, had a reminder, and played some quizzes and games, which I think is so important, because we are isolated in our homes. But as Dr. Hany said, there's no reason we can't connect. And I think the connecting is so important when many of us are feeling detached from one another in our communities. So that was one project that I really wanted to mention. And another one is that campus 17 to 26-year-olds are just going to be starting this week Quranic Arabic courses and Tajweed classes as well. So again, that whole element of getting back to the Qur'an and focusing on reciting it and reading it slowly, the quality, and learning lessons from it. If I can just show you those posters once again, there are many new people who've logged on today. Thank you so much for joining. Please don't lose touch with us. If I can just quickly show you what's coming up. This Saturday is Dr. Aman Durrani on our mental health. So that's open for everyone. Please do share the poster. Do join in yourselves. This Saturday, 2 o'clock till 3:15, your mental health before, during and after lockdown. And then every Wednesday in Ramadan, our normal e-circle will become this special Ramadan program, 6 o'clock to 6:45. And I think it's lovely that we have our reminders with Henrietta, Dr. Riza, Ihtisham Ali, Rahana Sadiq, and also that we have young campus reciters reciting Qur'an, 2 of whom, one is a Hafid and one is a Hafidha. So we can put our mics off and follow them in our own mushaf and follow where they are and get that time reciting Qur'an together from 6:30 to 6:45. Again, everybody is welcome. And finally, as ISB, we have this fantastic project to really help families. Many will be very happy doing their own thing, but some people may want a bit of help. We will be sending study circle notes to you all, so you can do some tafsir, do some seerah, attributes of Allah. There'll be a daily program sent to you on your phone. You can sit and have your family circles at home while we're socially distancing, but we're with our families, and it gives us, equips us with the information if we haven't got time or haven't got the facilities to be able to do that. That will be a great help. I'll put the PowerPoint off and finish now. Thank you all of our speakers for joining us for a wonderful e-circle get together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. And thank you everyone who logged on. May your Ramadans be wonderful and fulfilling. I'll finish with the dua. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Please keep in touch. Stay safe, stay at home. And I have to get my doctor bit in. Stay at home, stay safe, and let's pray for one another. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.